Hello, this is Christine from the Writing Center. I'm going to show you how to apply APA-style 7th edition formatting in PowerPoint. Let's begin with the title slide. Since APA-style student papers begin with a title page, we can adapt the title page guidelines to a title slide. Click on the placeholder text to type on the slide, and since the title goes in bold font, we'll do that here too. Select the text and click bold on the text toolbar. For papers, the font style must be legible and consistent throughout, and the same can be applied to presentations. So the default PowerPoint font Calibri is appropriate for an APA-style presentation. But the font size recommended for papers would be too small for a presentation. A best practice in PowerPoint is a font size of at least 24 points for body text and even larger for headings and the title. I'm using a plain styled theme with the default font. If you apply a theme that has a design, you'll see that the formatting including the font style will change. Within a theme, there are color scheme options as well. You can use a theme for the background design, but then manually change the font to match an APA-style paper, such as by centering the title slide information. For this example, I'm going to stick with the default theme and font. The placeholder for a subtitle is below the title, but here's a tip for APA-style presentations. Use that subtitle placeholder for the other elements needed on this slide, and instead put the subtitle after a colon in the title box. On a paper, the title page is double-spaced, but just as we adapt the font size to what is best for a slideshow, we can adapt spacing to the slide. I'm going to keep the default spacing for this title slide layout. The author's name goes below the title, and on the next line, the affiliated university. Then provide the course name and number, the instructor name, and due date. Here's an example. The title and subtitle are on top, and then we have the author name. Next is the university, and then the course number and name. You can usually find this information on the course syllabus. And when providing the instructor name, include the instructor's preferred honorific, such as doctor or professor, or omit that if the instructor doesn't use a title. The date format is month, day, year. And finally, an APA paper includes page numbers, so we will use slide numbers. On the Insert tab, select Slide Number to open the header and footer options, and check the slide number box. And then select Apply to All. As on a paper, when you use the Insert tool, the number will automatically advance to the next number on subsequent slides. And that is an APA-styled title slide in PowerPoint. Now let's look at how to format a body slide. Click New Slide and you'll see your options for body slide layouts. Let's start with the most standard layout with a title and content box. Use the Preview pane on the left to see the slide you're working on. On the View tab, this is also the normal view. APA style helps writers think critically, communicate clearly and precisely, and document sources ethically, and this applies to presentations in APA style too. Slides should present information clearly and plainly, have a slide title that reflects the main point of the slide, and slide text that is unified on that point, providing details, examples, or other data that develops or supports that main point. As an academic presentation, everything on the slide should be relevant, cited if from a source, and well edited. My list begins with a narrative in-text citation, since each of my points comes from a source. Follow the same guidelines as for papers when paraphrasing, quoting, and summarizing information from sources. If just one of those points came from research, I would use a parenthetical citation at the end of that point. And for any citation on the slide, I would create a corresponding reference list entry on a slide for the reference list at the end of the presentation. Applying APA Styles guidelines for lists to a PowerPoint slide, list related key points using bullet points. Number the points to show a hierarchy or chronology. And another key feature of listing in APA is to use parallelism, which means to repeat the syntactical structures of adjacent words, sentences, and clauses. For example, each of my points begins with a present tense verb, and each point is also a simple sentence. Parallelism creates uniformity. It unifies the points, making the information more cohesive, logical, and easier to read and understand. When editing your presentation, always check for parallelism and where you can use it to make slide content clearer and more unified. When the points are complete sentences, also use standard capitalization and punctuation. Another option is to capitalize and punctuate the list like it's one long sentence, beginning with a capital letter, using commas or semicolons as appropriate, using a conjunction before the last point, and ending with a period. When appropriate, you can also make lists using simple phrases without ending punctuation. Note that I still cite content that comes from a source and still use parallel structure. Each of these items begins with a noun phrase, followed by a prepositional phrase beginning with for. Let's look at how to add visual elements to your APA style presentation. I'm using a to content layout here. I did this by inserting a new slide and selecting to content from the layout menu. I've started my bulleted list in the left content box, and I will use the right box for a figure. You can create figures using the Smart Art or chart tools in PowerPoint. The content box has shortcuts to these tools, or you'll find them on the Insert tab. I want to add a pie chart. Once I click OK, I will see a sheet for my data points. I've typed in a new title for the figure and filled in the cells with examples. Click the X in the corner of the data sheet to close that out. My objective is to show you the APA style elements for using a figure on a slide. In APA style, figures have figure numbers, a title, the figure itself, and when needed, a note under the figure that provides any definitions or keys or legends that explains the elements or data in the figure. To add the figure label, I put the cursor before the title and clicked Enter twice to create a double-spaced second line. I typed the word figure in bold font and gave it a number based on the sequence of figures in my presentation. This is my first figure, so it's figure 1. Then on the next line, the title goes in italics and in title case, where each major word is capitalized. Another APA style guideline is to use a callout in the text that points the viewer to the figure. This may not be needed on a PowerPoint slide featuring the figure. If the guidelines for a paper seem not to make sense for a PowerPoint, then use your best judgment. Finally, for figures that need explanation, a note goes below the figure. The PowerPoint pie chart already provides a key for the colors, but we can put this key in APA style for the sake of an example. I'm going to begin by creating a text box for my note. On the Insert tab, select Text Box, and the mouse pointer will turn into crosshairs for creating a rectangle. Now I want to type over the existing key, so I'm going to fill in that text box with a white background. And then I've typed my note in the text box. Applying line formatting for a paper to a visual PowerPoint presentation may not work depending on how much space you have on your slide. But if you did double space everything as you would in a paper, you can format that by selecting the text and double spacing it. Tables follow the same formatting guidelines as figures, only instead of a figure number, you have a table number. If you use data from your research in your table or your figure, your note also needs to include a copyright statement. Students and scholars are permitted, according to fair use, to use data that's already been published as long as that note contains a copyright statement that identifies the copyright holder of that information. And then a reference entry would also be needed for that source. Copyrighted images are different. Permission is required to use a copyrighted image in your presentation. A copyright statement is also needed in the note that indicates you have reprinted the image with permission of the copyright holder. You also are required to include a copyright statement if you are using an image that is licensed for reuse, such as a Creative Commons or Unsplash license. These sites provide photos licensed for sharing. Sometimes the license does not even require attribution, but in APA style, a copyright statement would still be needed to show that you are using the image according to the license, as the note in Figure 2 on the slide does. And you are also required to include a copyright statement if the figure is in the public domain. Anything that doesn't have a note will be presumed to be yours, created by you, owned by you. So you want to make sure that's indeed true. Here is a basic template for a copyright statement for an image. Begin with from or adapted from if you modified or cropped the image. Then provide the title of the image, the author, the year, and in parentheses the DOI if it has one, or the URL where you retrieved the image online. Then copyright by copyright holder or the copyright license, or in the public domain. Then finally, reprinted with permission if that image was copyrighted and you received permission to use it. And any works with copyright statement in the note would also be listed in an entry on your reference list. And now let's look at formatting the reference list. Any PowerPoint that includes information from sources in the text requires a reference list with an entry for each source cited or noted. To create a reference list, begin a new slide and type your references. Following APA Style 7th edition, I labeled the list References using bold font and centered it. My objective is to show you the formatting of the list and not the individual reference entry formats, which vary. I type my list in the main content box, then select and delete that title box. Then I just move that content box up. Reference entries in APA style are double spaced, so I select the entries and apply double spacing using the line spacing menu in the paragraph section of the Home tab. APA-style references also use hanging indentations, and there are a couple ways to do this. I'm going to use the ruler to do this. If you do not see a ruler on your slide, you can select the ruler view on the View tab. Now when I select the entries, I will see the tabs on the ruler. And I click my mouse just on the bottom tab and drag it over a ½ inch. And that's it. Reference entries do not use bullet points or any numbering. The entries are alphabetized by the first word of the entry or first major word if the first word happens to be a, an, or the. You may use smaller font or multiple slides to fit all your references if you have more than a few. And there you have an APA-style reference list in PowerPoint. I hope this video helps you format your next presentation in APA style. Thank you for listening.